Father's Day weekend, 1969. A 6-year-old boy crouches behind a bush in the Great Smoky Mountains, giggling with 3 other children as they plot to jump out and surprise the adults. His bright red shirt stands out against the green foliage. The other boys count down, then burst from their hiding spots, laughing. But Dennis Martin never emerges. His father calls his name. 3 minutes pass. 5 minutes. The laughter stops. Dennis's father begins running through the forest, shouting frantically. Within hours, what started as an innocent game of hide-and-seek would trigger the largest search operation in national park history. 1,400 people scouring 56 square miles of wilderness. They would find nothing. Not a shoe. Not a scrap of fabric. Not a single trace of the boy in the red shirt. And then someone reported seeing something that made everyone question what really happened in those woods. This is the story of how a child vanished in plain sight, and why, more than 50 years later, nobody can explain where he went. Dennis Lloyd Martin was born on June 20, 1962, in Knoxville, Tennessee. He was the youngest in his family, with an older brother named Douglas. By all accounts, Dennis was a playful, adventurous kid who loved being outdoors. He attended special education classes because his mental development was about 6 months behind his chronological age, but his family described him as healthy, capable, and not particularly fearful. The Martin family had a tradition. Every Father's Day weekend, the men would pack up and head to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for a camping trip. It was a ritual that bonded fathers and sons, a chance to disconnect from everyday life and breathe mountain air. In June 1969, Dennis's father William, his grandfather Clyde, and his 9-year-old brother Douglas made the familiar drive to the park. This would be Dennis's first overnight camping experience in the wilderness. He must have been excited. On June 13th, they hiked from Cades Cove to Russell Field and camped overnight. Everything went smoothly. Dennis kept pace with the adults, absorbed in the adventure. The next morning, June 14th, they set out for Spence Field, a grassy highland meadow near the Tennessee-North Carolina border, bisected by the famous Appalachian Trail. It's a beautiful spot, open and airy with panoramic mountain views, the perfect place to spend Father's Day weekend. When they arrived at Spence Field, they encountered another family who happened to share the same last name, Martin. The families weren't related, but they had young boys around the same age, and the children quickly bonded. While the adults sat in a grassy area talking, the 4 boys hatched a plan. They would sneak into the woods, split up, circle around, and jump out to surprise their parents. Classic kid stuff. Douglas Martin and 2 other boys headed south and west. Dennis went northwest toward the Appalachian Trail. His father watched him disappear into the bushes, that red shirt visible for just a moment before the forest swallowed him. Minutes later, Douglas and the other boys leaped out, laughing and proud of their prank, but Dennis didn't appear. William Martin waited 3 to 5 minutes before he became concerned and began calling for his son. Dennis was described as a quiet boy who might not call out on his own, but would answer if someone spoke to him. William shouted Dennis's name over and over. No response. He jogged west along the Appalachian Trail, calling out, scanning the trees. Nothing. He returned to the group, hoping Dennis had come back while he was searching. He hadn't. William ran the trail again, this time pushing all the way to Russell Field, 2.5 miles. Still nothing. By now, panic had set in. Dennis's grandfather, Clyde, hiked down the Anthony Creek Trail to Cades Cove to alert park rangers. He arrived around 8:30 p.m. It had been roughly 4 hours since anyone had seen Dennis, and as darkness fell over the Smoky Mountains, the weather turned. A thunderstorm rolled in. In a matter of hours, 3 inches of rain poured down, washing out trails and causing streams to flood. Temperatures dropped to nearly 50 degrees Fahrenheit. If Dennis was lost and exposed, the elements would not be kind. Any footprints he might have left behind were now gone, erased by the deluge. But here's what makes this case so haunting. Dennis hadn't just wandered off into an endless wilderness. He vanished in a specific, contained area where adults were watching. It was around 4:30 p.m. when he was last seen. Spence Field is an open, grassy clearing. The forest around it is dense, yes, but the timeline is impossibly tight. Between the moment Dennis went behind that bush and the moment his father started searching, only 3 to 5 minutes passed. How far could a 6-year-old boy travel in that time? The search began at dawn on June 15. The National Park Service assembled a crew of 30 people initially. Within hours, that number swelled to 240. Park rangers, firefighters, college students, Boy Scouts, everyone who could help flooded into the park. By Dennis's 7th birthday on June 20, nearly 800 people were involved. The next day, the search peaked at 1,400 participants, including 60 Green Berets who had been training nearby. Helicopters scanned ridges. Planes flew overhead. Searchers combed steep ravines and thick underbrush. Dogs were brought in, though the rain had likely washed away scent trails. By June 22nd, 56 square miles of ground had been covered. Over the following weeks, searchers logged more than 13,000 man-hours. They found nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no blood, no signs of struggle. It was as if Dennis Martin simply ceased to exist. The search was officially closed on September 14, 1969. As of 2025, it remains the largest search in the history of Great Smoky Mountain Park. Dennis's father offered a $5,000 reward for information, a substantial sum in 1969, equivalent to over $40,000 today. Tips flooded in, many from psychics claiming to know what happened. None led anywhere. So what happened to Dennis Martin? The theories are as disturbing as they are varied. The official explanation leans toward accidental death from exposure. The area where Dennis disappeared is marked by steep slopes and ravines, home to copperheads, snakes, bears, feral hogs, and bobcats. The thinking goes that Dennis, perhaps disoriented or scared, wandered deeper into the wilderness, succumbed to the cold and rain, and died somewhere the searchers couldn't reach. His body could have been washed into a crevasse, buried under debris, or consumed by wildlife. But that explanation requires you to accept something almost impossible: that 1,400 people searching 56 square miles found absolutely nothing. Child-sized footprints were discovered on June 17, leading to a stream. One foot appeared barefoot, the other wore a shoe matching the type Dennis had on. Park officials dismissed the tracks, believing they belonged to a Boy Scout helping with the search. But retired park ranger Dwight McCarter later argued the prints likely were Dennis's. They weren't part of a group, and no Boy Scouts were searching barefoot. Why would Dennis lose a shoe? If he fell, was injured, or was running scared, a shoe coming off makes sense. But if those tracks were his, it means he made it to that stream, and then what? The trail goes cold at the water's edge. Then there's the wildlife theory. Black bears inhabit the Smokies. So do feral pigs, which can be aggressive. But wildlife experts were skeptical from the start. An animal large enough to take a child would leave evidence: torn clothing, blood, drag marks. There was nothing. And no animal in the area had shown aggressive behavior before or after Dennis disappeared. And then there's the theory that terrified Dennis's family and haunts researchers to this day: abduction. Harold Key was a visitor to the park that day, roughly 7 miles from Spence Field near an area called Rowan's Creek. Around the time Dennis vanished, Key heard what he described as a sickening scream. Not an animal, not a bird, a human scream, sudden and unnatural. Shortly after, Key and his family spotted a disheveled, unkempt man darting through the woods, apparently trying to avoid being seen. Key's family later said the man appeared to be carrying something red over his shoulder. Dennis was wearing a bright red t-shirt. Harold Key reported his sighting roughly an hour after Dennis's disappearance. When he eventually came forward to authorities, the FBI investigated, but they dismissed the connection. The distance between Spence Field and where Key claimed to see the man was about 5 miles as the crow flies, closer to 7 or 9 miles by trails. Officials deemed it nearly impossible for someone to have abducted Dennis and covered that distance in the available time frame, especially while carrying a struggling child through rugged terrain. But here's the problem with that dismissal. Retired Ranger Dwight McCarter and William Martin later hiked the route themselves. Both completed the trek in roughly 90 minutes. So the timeline wasn't impossible. It was difficult, yes, but not impossible for someone motivated and familiar with the terrain. Who was the man Harold Key saw? Was he carrying Dennis? Or was it a coincidence? A moonshiner trying to stay hidden? A hermit uncomfortable around people? Someone completely unrelated to the case?
We'll never know. The man was never identified. The scream was never explained. In 1985, a man who had been illegally harvesting ginseng in the park came forward. He claimed that years earlier he had discovered a child's skeleton near an uprooted tree in an area called Big Hollow, roughly 3 miles downhill from Spence Field. He hadn't reported it at the time because he feared prosecution for the illegal ginseng harvesting. When authorities searched the area in 1985, they found nothing. Too much time had passed. The forest had reclaimed whatever might have been there. Was that skeleton Dennis Martin? Possibly. But without remains, we have no answers. The case file documents a search plagued with problems. A later review noted that the park failed to quickly organize manpower, establish overhead command structure, and manage public relations. Rescue squad members arrived without proper equipment. Coordination was chaotic. Ironically, the sheer number of searchers may have destroyed evidence. 1,400 people trampling through the wilderness, obscuring tracks and scent trails. One critical mistake. Scent tracking dogs weren't used initially because of the rain. But park officials later acknowledged that even though rain washed away the original trail, Dennis would have created a new scent trail if he continued moving after the storm passed. That oversight might have cost them their best chance at finding him. Dennis's case did something important, though. It changed how search and rescue operations are conducted in national parks across America. The failures of the 1969 search became a case study. Today, searchers rely on smaller, specialized teams, tighter coordination, and methods designed to preserve evidence rather than obliterate it. The reforms came too late for Dennis, but they've helped save others.
William Martin, Dennis's father, never stopped believing his son was taken. He carried that conviction until his death in 2014, never receiving the closure he desperately needed. The family offered rewards, followed leads, endured decades of uncertainty. They couldn't bury their son. They couldn't know how he died, or if he suffered, or if somewhere, against all logic, he might still be alive. That's the cruelty of disappearances like this. They leave families suspended in an unbearable limbo, unable to grieve properly because the ending never comes. Over the decades, theories have grown wilder. Some claim feral people live deep in the Smoky Mountains abducting children. Others point to Bigfoot, or government conspiracies, or supernatural forces. None of these theories hold water. The truth is almost certainly more mundane and more tragic. Either Dennis wandered off, became disoriented in the vast wilderness, and died from exposure in a place so remote that even 1,400 searchers couldn't find him. Or someone took him in those critical minutes when he was out of sight, and that person has carried the secret for over half a century. Clay Jordan, deputy park superintendent, said it plainly. I think it is virtually impossible that we will ever know what happened to Dennis. The Great Smoky Mountains remain beautiful and popular, visited by millions every year, but they're also unforgiving. Dwight McCarter noted that for every year remains lie in the park, the forest layers up about 1 inch of debris. 56 years have passed since Dennis vanished. If his body is still out there, it's buried under more than 4 feet of decomposing leaves, soil, and undergrowth. The forest has reclaimed him. But somewhere in those mountains, an answer exists. A shoe, a bone, a scrap of red fabric, something that could finally tell us what happened in those 3 to 5 minutes when a little boy in a red shirt stepped behind a bush and never came back. Dennis Lloyd Martin would be 62 years old today. Age-progressed photos show what he might look like, a middle-aged man with Dennis's features aged by time. But those images feel like ghosts, possibilities that were stolen on Father's Day weekend in 1969. His case remains open. The National Park Service still lists him as missing, and every year, on June 14th, people remembered the boy who vanished mid-game, the search that became historic, and the family that never got to say goodbye. The Smoky Mountains keep their secrets, and Dennis Martin's fate is one they've held on to for more than 50 years. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one for more stories.